live. Rylan, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I thought we might start like we're recording this a few days after the race in Chicago, where you did very well. How are you recovering from that? Do you recover well from this sort of race?
I don't think it was so much the race, but I didn't really recover super well. I think it was all of the races before plus that race. Like the days leading up to that race, I definitely could tell that my body was starting to send signals of like, hey, I want to go home. I want to sleep in my own bed. I was having because of all the jet lag and all the traveling and sleeping in different places, I could tell like my nervous system was pretty tanked. Like I was starting to get eye flutter and stuff. So after that race, I literally flew home that night. And since then, I've been kind of trying to be careful in training, like not send it too hard. Just because the week before HYROX Chicago, I did three back-to-back races at Trifecta Worlds in Greece. So that was about 28 miles of just full gas racing. So I'm grateful to be home and I'm trying to absorb all of the racing.
You did incredibly well anyway, but bearing in mind like the lead up you had to the race, it didn't feel like you were particularly trying to purely peak for Chicago. Um, do
No,
you
no.
do, do you? I mean, I know you've said to me in the survey before that like you feel like people can do maybe a lot more in a lot of sports rather than having to specialize in something like this. What is it that you feel like maybe you do better than other people that would let them compete to that level after that much activity?
So I don't think it's so much the like me doing something better, but I do think if you work exclusively on like trying to what I call like build a bigger engine. I have like a 5-year goal of continuing to build a bigger and bigger engine, and then I'll reevaluate when I'm about 27, 28 and see what I want to do. But the reason I've committed to that goal the last few years is because in cycling I realized that I got a pretty big engine from that, and then I transferred it over to running, and went really well. But I realized like I still love mountain biking. I absolutely love hiking flies. I love running in the mountains. And if I train a lot in the mountains and then I try and transfer that to a HYROX or a DecaFit, I have to do like small specialization blocks or microcycles to get ready for them. But it can be done if I do it correctly. So if I do a lot of like I'm sure people are sick of me saying this, but if I do a lot of neuromuscular work, so like teaching that brain body connection, how to run fast again on flats, because if the fitness is there, the skill is a lot more transferable. So like running uphill is I would say is less of a skill and more fitness based than running on flat. Whereas like running on flat, you could be insanely fit, but if your running economy is terrible, you could still be really slow. So what I try and do is I focus on building my fitness in a variety of different ways, like my aerobic capacity. And then also I still work on my anaerobic ceiling as well. Like I still am doing VO2 max training and I'm still doing training above VO2 max, depending on the time of year. But I'm continually trying to do like block after block after block, even if I can't run my normal mileage. Like I'm still the long-term vision is basically by any means necessary continue to build my engine. And then that way, if I do get the opportunity to race like a HYROX Valencia and then Chicago, all I have to do is, change my training for a few weeks leading up to it. And as long as I've been working on my strength and my aerobic capacity, it's really similar in the energy system demands to a Spartan Super or a Spartan Beast. Because at least for me, the way I like to race most HYROXs that I've done, as I found I do really well if I can bring my heart rate down slightly on the runs. So, like in Chicago, I would come out of a station with a specific heart rate goal. And if I was above that, I would focus on my breathing and do a lot of sub threshold running to help bring it down. So, like in Chicago, I was focused on running basically like half marathon or slower pace.
Okay.
And that way I could slowly bring my heart rate down. So at the end of every run in Chicago, my heart rate was probably 4 to 5 beats lower than when I started the run. And I also had to race differently than everyone else because I knew with the fitness that I was bringing into Chicago, I needed to use the runs as my strength and allow myself to recover so that I could still station with everybody else. So that was my strategy.
I saw you were wearing a heart rate strap during the race. Are you actually looking at where your heart rate is during the race?
Yeah, yeah, I looked a few times. There was once or twice where it didn't seem accurate because I've actually, this is another thing that's maybe a little bit different about me is I started heart rate training when I was about 13 years old, so about 12 years ago, 12, 13 years ago now. Because the soccer team that I played for got sponsored by a heart rate based training company. And so that's when I started doing circuit training, like back to back compound lifts, straight into like jump roping or running. And then you run back into the gym and do another couple deadlifts, like hang cleans, things like that. So I started specific hybrid training before it was a thing, like way back when I was 12 or 13. And then I went into cycling and I still lifted because you endurance athletes can have a lot of benefit from lifting. So I continued to lift, and then I got into firefighting and did a ton of lifting.
Okay.
So, but I also got into trail running, and so I've always kind of been doing both. And then now there's a sport for it. So I don't want to give off the idea to people that they can just, they can just walk into a HYROX and do really well. Like in a way, I've been training like that for my whole life. So I have a broad base to pull different micro or mesocycles out of. So like I don't need a year or two to prepare my aerobic engine anymore because I just constantly have kept that since I was, basically since I was a kid. Like my parents made us do 30 minutes to an hour of aerobic activity a day. And then if we got in trouble, my mom would make us run an extra like 3 miles. So it's interesting how it all played out. But yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
in a cool family like that. It's fun.
Nice. It reminds me actually of when I spoke to Hunter and he'd just come back after like having his Olympic ambitions in a different sport, and then he came back and did the world record. And we talked about, oh, how can you come back and just suddenly run a HYROX? But he's got years and years and years behind him of doing several different sports. He's got that base. It's not like your average person can do it without that base, but it's a similar aspect, I guess. Really, what you're saying. Out of interest, where do you want your heart rate to be on a run, and like what percentage of your heart rate max is that?
So that's been an interesting thing. It's come down with my age, as everyone does. So I used to, when I was 17, 18 years old, I could redline for about 90 minutes at like 185 average. But I've noticed like for that HYROX, it was only 55 minutes, and I was trying to average somewhere around 175 to 180. So 30 minutes less of racing, and I'm still averaging about 10 beats less, which is kind of wild. And I'm not on a bike, I'm running, which technically it should be a little higher, but um, the last 6 or 7 years, my ventricles have definitely gotten stronger. So my heart is more efficient at pumping blood, but it also requires more blood to pump that. So it's an interesting balance of like when your heart starts to get stronger and it doesn't have to squeeze as much because it's squeezing more forcefully. And then also as you get older, it becomes more efficient and your top end starts to go. I've found my threshold has dropped probably by about 7 to 8 beats already.
Okay,
So yeah, somewhere in the 175 to 180 range is usually like pretty comfortable for me.
interesting. All right. So your time in Chicago, 55:46, third best time, well, third fastest athlete ever. That makes you in HYROX. Did you feel like you had that sort of time in you?
Uh, I did a couple race simulations before, and that's why like I'm sure people didn't believe me because I didn't really say it very much, but I personally felt like Valencia's run was long because I knew I was at sea level and I knew what my normal splits would be at altitude, and I was still like taking longer on the run. So I felt like either the rock zone was really long or the runs were really long. I wasn't sure. So I actually thought my Valencia time was a bit long to me. That's what I thought. And so I was pretty confident in Chicago that it would be faster as long as the sleds weren't slower. And it turns out the sleds were pretty fast, or I felt like they were easier than Valencia by quite a bit. Um, so yeah, because I think in Valencia I broke them up uh, either every half or every third. And in Chicago I did two lengths without even breaking, and it didn't really hurt that bad. So yeah, I don't know if that time's legit. Like to be honest, I have a hard time with comparing times in HYROX. Like I think it's awesome that I have the third fastest time ever. Like I'm happy about that. And in my race sims, I actually think I'm capable of a little bit more, but or a little bit less time. Sorry, but I feel bad that I got that time on that day. Yes, it was a grid format, so technically I was slower on the grid format because that like turning on the farmer's carry definitely slows me down. The lunges, the burpees, but also I feel bad because the sleds did feel really easy. And so
Yeah.
I'm like, well, maybe it's not legit. So
Nothing to feel bad about. You just got to deal with what you puts in front of you in the day, right? You know.
yeah, which is why I was glad I was in the Elite 15 because I would have felt worse if I wasn't going head to head against the other top guys. But since I was going head to head, I was like, okay, everybody has to deal with it. I feel better about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I was just looking at your splits from the weekend actually, and sort of comparing them against Valencia, and it looked like you've got a very good ski, one of the best 2K ski times I think in that elite field, and it was rapid in Valencia, your ski, but it looked much slower in Chicago. I mean, maybe that was a timing chip error, I don't know, but was that a conscious decision?
so I think it was actually a timing chip error in
Okay.
Valencia. I honestly haven't looked at my Valencia splits because I went straight from there to Trifecta World, so I didn't really analyze it that much. I just looked at my own data, and I think in Valencia, I think I only held like a 147 or something per 500. And also, I realized I think I might have mixed my ski and my row on the survey, possibly because my row is definitely down below like 630. I don't think I've ever tested my 2K ski, so I apologize. That might be
That's
wrong.
so your Valencia ski time, it says it was 3:22, which is
Yeah,
incredibly
no,
impressive.
no,
Okay.
no. Wait. Actually, no, it probably would have been more like a 330.
Right.
I think 330 to 335 is what I had on my watch.
Okay.
Because I purposefully like I run in faster. I usually get there first, and then I purposely like let everybody like I see guys, hitting around that 320 pace, and I'm just like, I feel like they're gonna blow up. And so far, everyone has except for Kent. So I got to work on my ski more. But yeah, I think it's way too early in the race to just hammer.
Okay. Um, your and go back to your 2K times, by the way. I think you told me 6:30 for your ski and 6:25 for your row for your 2Ks.
Yeah, 625 for the row is right. The ski, I would need to test that again. I feel like that's actually too low. I don't know if I typoed that or what, but I feel like it's probably closer to like 645 or 650.
Right.
But yeah,
Still,
that's
still
I've
not
never done
bad.
a two ski. Yeah, my bad, man. My bad.
No, no. Um, Valencia. So you did 58:11 in Valencia, like not far before Chicago, but that was a significant improvement over what you'd done previously. And I know like courses are different and all that sort of stuff, but was there anything you changed specifically in your training in that time that you feel like led to your improvement?
I wasn't sick and I'm sleeping more. That's what I changed.
Helps.
HYROX LA, I was trying to pretend like I wasn't super sick for a while. And I just like kind of that. I remember laying in my bed before I was supposed to start the warm up, and it was like a 2 p.m. race, and I was still in bed. Like I went to go register, and then I immediately went back to the hotel to just lay down. And I was just like, I'm here. I'm gonna race. I don't know what's going on. But I had a lot of health problems around uh, late November through May of this year. And then I had some like, and then I had a foot problem because I got like a skin tear that like tore open because I had a cut, it tore open. Doctor said I could keep running on it, tore open more, got infected with a virus. Then I had to get it cauterized like three-ish times. And when it's cauterized, it hurts so bad. And when it's torn open. And so I couldn't run for a while. But before that, I was just getting sick all the time. So I used to be a full-time firefighter. But now I have my coaching business. So now I'm a full-time coach and athlete. And I got sick 3 times, like more sick than I can really ever remember in my life. One was in November. One was in February and another one was in April. And I basically just had to face the fact that I can't travel to races in a different time zone, come back, work 72 to 96 hours to pay back all my shift trades like in a row, and then travel to the next race. And so I had to be honest with myself because I was able to handle it for a couple months. And then I just started getting sick and feeling like garbage all the time. So I had to be honest with myself and be like, all right, well, you're 25, or at the time I was 24, and just be honest about, okay, I can come back to firefighting if I want. But if I want to focus on racing, this is not the job to do both if I'm trying to travel to a bunch of different countries and compete. If I was only doing HYROX, I think it would be very doable. But since I'm also trying to, like, my personal goal is to be competitive in Xterra, to be competitive in sky running, to be competitive in some cycling races, and also Spartan and then HYROX as well, and DecaFit. So with all those race seasons in a year, like I really have to be able to sleep. So between like last October and this April, I was struggling to sleep more than a couple hours at a time just because of all the night calls at work. I was really used to getting up all the time. And my crew didn't like how often I was gone. They didn't like that I was traveling a lot. And so I eventually just made the call of like, okay, maybe it's something I come back to later, but I owe it to myself to see what I'm really capable of. So,
I
yeah.
was going to ask you, funnily enough, because I knew you did the shift work as a firefighter, and I think some of the European guys struggled with jet lag in Chicago. Similarly, some of the Americans in Manchester this year. Do you have? I mean, it sounds like you got sick as a result of everything you were doing. But do you have any specific tips for people, like when they are traveling abroad and don't want jet lag to affect their race and their performance? Do you have any tips? Any ways you approach it?
Yeah, so Valencia was only a couple days after, like 2 days after I got to Europe. And then Chicago was also only 2 days after I got back to the United States. So I was jet lagged for both of them. And I think the biggest things that have actually helped me is there's some natural like supplements that I would have to look on what's on the container, but it's like an all natural plant based like capsule that helps with sleep. And then also I stay away from melatonin because from what I understand about melatonin, it tanks your testosterone. And so I want my testosterone to be like normal, healthy male levels, or as high as I can get it basically naturally. But during jet lag timeframes, I will take melatonin when I can, like right before I'm starting to feel sleepy. I'll like take melatonin so I can sleep. but I'll also, like, when I was coming, as soon as Trifecta Worlds was over, I knew I had 1 week to get back to the US and adapt as much as possible for the Chicago race. So I knew the Chicago race was at 12. So I figured out what time that would be while I was in Greece, and I tried to make sure that I was awake and also trying to exercise during that time for the entire week leading up, even though that was the time I was kind of feeling drowsy and like I wanted to sleep. As much as possible, I would try and stay awake during that time, and also like go outside and at least go for a walk or maybe even an easy run, because a lot of people, I used to do this for cycling racing as well. If I raced at 8 a.m., for as many training sessions as I could leading up to the event, I would try and train at 8 a.m. because there's something about that circadian rhythm where even your training falls into it, even if you're not jet lagged. Like if I'm in the US and I'm going to another US race, but the race is at 7 p.m., that's not normal for me. So I will specifically start doing some evening sessions so that I can figure out what food I'm going to eat, if I'm going to take a nap before, what type of activity level I want in the morning. Like I found I do better with like an easy bike ride or a shakeout run in the morning if I'm racing all the way in the evening, things like that. So I'll look at the race time because that changes drastically with HYROX. Sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's midday like Chicago, and then Valencia was like 5 p.m., I want to say. So I'll look at the race time and I'll try and adjust more off that. And then the other thing that I've done is I try and get a room with blackout curtains. It's like most hotels have blackout curtains, but that's something I've I've definitely latched onto is pulling when it's time to sleep, like even if I'm adjusting to a time zone in the future, maybe it's not dark out yet, but I'll put my blue blockers on, I'll close the curtains, I'll try and like trick my brain into thinking it's sunset. And I might take a melatonin to start to feel sleepy, and then hopefully I sleep long enough. And then if I don't feel like I got enough, I never nap when I'm at home, but I will nap if I feel like if I need it, as long as it's not during that race time.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. All right. Brilliant. Just a couple more questions about the Chicago race. One, I saw, I think it was Matt B. Davis actually posted up a video of you starting quite a few seconds behind the other guys. You almost let them leave the tunnel and then you started. What was the reason for that?
So this is where maybe I'm just a bit different than the other guys, and that's totally okay. But I think a lot of people think that racing matters a lot to me, and winning matters and such. And in a way, it does. Like I love to win, I love to race, but I've found throughout my life of racing, like as soon as I win a race, like the joy's gone. It doesn't actually mean that much. Like, yes, I ran around a circle faster than anyone else and pushed some sleds, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really help many people. It might help inspire people, and that's my goal. Like I want to help inspire people to be healthier versions of themselves and to try new things. Which that's one of the main reasons I do so many sports, is because I want to show people they don't have to stay in a gym all the time and just push a sled back and forth and then run on an assault runner. Like those are great tools, and if you enjoy that, you can. But there's a large percentage of people like myself who love to be out in the mountains. So I'm trying to show people you can train outside, you can get the vitamin D absorption from the sun, you can train in a very healthy, sustainable way for a lifetime, instead of just doing these 6-month blocks of, oh, I'm miserable, but I'm going to train for this race, I'm going to train for this race. Whereas like me, my whole lifestyle, I'm trying to slowly build my capabilities towards being able to do a lot of races, because I enjoy it so much. So it's like, when before that race, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian for about 2.5 years now, and I I just had a I don't really claim that God speaks to me, but I had this feeling that I hadn't been giving God my first fruits, and it's this principle in the Bible that nothing that you have is actually yours because it's all given to you. Like if you think about it, life is given to you. Your house, yes, possibly, like you probably worked for an income to buy, like I worked for an income to buy my house. I've worked for the adaptations to be able to train and race, but my health could be taken at any point and then I wouldn't be able to race. And that was basically from, from March until September for me. A lot of my body was not healthy through a variety of different ways, and a lot of things happened, and it definitely helped remind me that it's not all mine. Like I came from dust, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna go back to dust. Like everything that I have is given to me. And so I felt like I hadn't been recognizing that from God, and I was getting a little too caught up in the racing side of things. So I told myself I would just pray until I was done. And when they said start, or go, I wasn't ready, so I sat there for a little bit and finished up my prayer and gave God that time first, and then I decided to go. So that's why.
Cool. Okay. Um, and then my other question about the race, your lunge technique looks to be, I feel like you stretch on the lunge, like your lunge is longer than someone else's might be. Is that a conscious decision? Is that just what you feel suits you?
I think it's what suits me, but also if you look at, I was actually looking at a picture of Kent and I side by side, and we're both a very similar height. I think he might even be a little bit taller than me. I'm not sure how tall he is, but my femurs are significantly longer, and that's something that I like. Maybe it's my coach brain or whatever, but I am always like sizing people up. And if you have longer femurs, it makes squatting harder. But if you look at his hip bone and my hip bone, like I can get more distance on a lunge because my legs are slightly longer. And I don't even have that long of legs, but my femurs are. And in the lunge, your from your tibia, like from your ankle to your knee, that part is going to be up and down anyway. So a lot of the distance comes from both of your femurs. So that might be why my lunge is a lot longer. Is just because I have two femurs that are longer than most of the guys in the field, which does make squatting harder, but it makes lunging easier.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, interesting. Let's talk drug testing in
Yeah.
HYROX. So you put up a post about drug testing. You think HYROX should be drug testing in the sport. Can you talk about that some more?
Yeah, so I'm actually not calling for drug testing right away. It's just not even against the rules. And I've never, so I decided about 9 weeks ago now that I was gonna train for HYROX because I did a Deca Strong and a Deca Mile, and they both went really well after I got back from injury. And I was like, well, if I can slowly build my running, I think this can go really well. So I started running again and specifically training for HYROX. And because last year, I'll be honest, I was a little bit I was frustrated with the whole like timing system and trying, like I did HYROX LA and got a penalty, and so I got bumped out of the top 30 or 20 or whatever it was, so I didn't get to go to North American Champs, all that stuff. I was like, you know what, I'm done with HYROX. But a few weeks ago, I realized I had really good HYROX fitness just because I've been doing a lot of machine work and a lot of strength work, and so I decided to use it. And so I actually have been disqualified at a world championship race for using chalk because I thought it was legal and it wasn't. It was at OCRWC in 2022. And so before I did HYROX, like I've heard, people are upset about burpee broad jump techniques or things like that. So I was like, I'm gonna read the rule book. And so around 6 weeks ago, I had already bought flights to Valencia and also already bought flights to Chicago because I was pretty certain that I would qualify. Um, and then I decided to read the rule book. And so I read the rule book and there's nothing about any sort of substance. And I was like, this is a really easy thing to write in. I don't understand why there's no rule against it. So I started reaching out to other athletes, and from what I understand, like a lot of athletes have brought it up, like, hey, we want a clean sport, like we should have some sort of rule for this. And and there hasn't been anything instituted. And I actually thought about not racing Chicago after I found out, because I I don't. It's hard for me because it's a new brand, so I feel like I should give the brand time to take a stance on it. But writing it in a rule book is very simple to me. Like you in then implementing drug testing after. But the fact that it's not actually illegal, that's what bothers me. Like if the company was like, this is wrong, but we can't afford drug testing yet, I would at least be like, oh, okay, well, I can support this brand because they're taking a stance against it. Because I'm one of those people where I feel like you should, if you want to support a company, you buy their product. If you don't want to support a company, you don't buy their product. And so, like HYROX uses the Elite 15 to help market their brand, and it's brilliant. Like they're growing incredibly fast. They do a great job with marketing. I love it. But I don't want to, like, I try and think about what my kids would think, and then also like the sports that I would want my kids or young men that I'm mentoring to get into. And I don't want to see HYROX become like cycling was 20 years ago, where all of the juniors basically they realized that if they wanted that extra 1 or 2%, they were going to have to start cheating, and because everybody was doing it. And I just see that happening in HYROX in 10 to 20 years from now if we don't start now saying like, hey, that's not welcome in our sport. So I don't think they have to start drug testing now. I would love to see it. I don't think it would need to be super expensive to scare people away. I think a strategy that they could use is, first they got to write it in the rule book and make it illegal, and then give it a couple months for anyone who's using to cycle off, if there are people using. Um, and then just like 1 to 2 completely random, like if you're in the Elite 15, what cycling does, like I have a buddy who's a Olympic level track cyclist that lives close to here. And basically he has certain months or certain time periods where they're allowed to come to his house at any point and just show up, do a drug test, and then leave. And he doesn't get notified at all unless it's an hour before. So like way too short to cycle off. They're basically like, you have to be at your house in 2 hours. And you get, I think it's 3 or 4 strikes before, like you can say you're traveling. You can be like, well, I'm traveling in another country. But after the third time, they just say, hey, you're avoiding us. And oh, he actually just texted me right now. Sorry. They say like, hey, you're avoiding us, and that's 3 strikes, you're out type thing. So then basically because a lot of people are like, oh, you just cycle off a few weeks before the event or a few months before the event. And I'm like, exactly. People can do that and they won't get caught. But if it's completely random and no one knows when it's going to happen, and also it doesn't have to be like the whole field, you can just show up randomly to people's houses, and as long as nobody knows, like literally nobody knows, it could be me, it could be Kent, it could be Rich Ryan, like, no one has any idea. It just happens like once a year to somebody. That's, in my mind, that's enough to be like, oh, I could be the next guy. Like I could be the next guy that they randomly show up to my house and I have to make sure I'm clean. And if it's not even at races, then no one can really time when they're cycling on and cycling off certain drugs.
Yeah.
So that's my like cheaper way of thinking about it. But first I just want to see it. Like I want to support a brand that I believe in what they're teaching to people. And if a brand is saying, hey, like we're not going to take a stance on this, like we think it's fine, I probably will discontinue doing HYROX at any sort of level. If they decide to take a stance that's like, yeah, this is wrong, but we can't afford testing, I'm going to keep competing. But it's more of like, it's what my actions are saying by supporting a brand versus like what there is actually in their rule book. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Funnily enough, I had this conversation on the way home from Chicago with someone, and it's like, without it in the rule book, if you're in the elites or age groups or whatever, you can sit there at the moment and justify to yourself that you're not cheating. Like,
Yeah, it's not cheating right now.
yeah,
That's my issue.
and
Like
there's
no legitimate sport is allowing that right now. So like if HYROX wants to be a legitimate sport, it makes sense to me, except bodybuilding. Bodybuilding has like a natural category and a enhanced category, or whatever they call it.
Yeah.
But you know, that's even different. They're just using certain steroids to help with mass. HYROX has a different problem because you don't really necessarily need more mass. Like blood doping could be a thing, or EPO. Like it's not the ones that make guys look jacked and you can tell. Like it's the same drugs that cyclists or runners are going to be using.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel free not to answer this, but I've got to ask: do you feel like it's a problem at the moment in the elites?
I honestly would like to believe not. I'm friends with a couple of the guys. I've known them for a bit, and I don't think so. And you know, a few of the other guys I don't really know, but they seem like really nice, and I always try and believe the best in people until proven otherwise. So that's why I would like to see the rule come now, because I've talked with most of the Elite 15 that was there about it before I said anything, and a lot of them said they had brought it up, and that's why I was like, well, maybe we need to take this to another level and be like, I sent an email to HYROX actually. I was like, hey, I think we really should change this, and I want to know you guys' stance on it, because I do understand if it's just a cost thing, like it's a new sport, it's growing, you want to put money back into the sport, like you have to spend money to make money is a great business principle in a lot of senses. Like the money that comes in from racers, in order to grow, you got to put it back into the business. So I get that. But at some point, like just writing it in the rules is pretty simple. Um, so I was like, well, all the other guys seem to be on the same page, so I don't really think anyone is doing anything illegal. Um, But with the prize money going up and up, and also the notoriety of HYROX, it's only a matter of time. Because what's surprising is I actually don't think it's usually the top athletes that are using, it's the people trying to get to the top. So, like you talked about how Hunter has a very broad base of athleticism, and I have a very broad base of athleticism. A lot of people are looking for the shortcut to get up to that next level instead of years of work, because that's something that people have said in Spartan racing. Like I just popped out of nowhere and I was like a good Spartan racer, and what they don't know is I tried to start racing in 2020, but COVID shut everything down. So I trained that entire year, and then the year before I was training for Spartan, I just didn't compete. And then before that, like I was a cyclist, and before that, I was a soccer player that strength trained a ton. And after that, I was a firefighter who did a ton of strength training and a trail runner. So it's like it takes years and years to get to a certain level, but drugs can help you accelerate that. So in cycling, it actually wasn't always the top pros that were using. A lot of the time it was the people trying to make the jump
Mm-hmm.
from age group to pro, or trying to, like, they literally wouldn't even get any money. They just wanted the Stars and Stripes jersey for their age group championship, at national championships and at like USA Cycling national championships. Like that was a big deal to a lot of people, and it's more about the notoriety and the fame. And so I see as HYROX grows, like it's already got such a good reputation of like, wow, that person like won that HYROX event or something. And I can definitely see if it's legal, more people are going to use. Like that's just how it's going to be. And I will say, I understand some people have medical conditions, so you know, like maybe they had testicular cancer and they need to take testosterone, like stuff like that. There should always be exemptions. Um, However, across the board, I think it should just be like other sports where they have rules written in place, and it's like, hey, if you want to compete in the Elite 15, or hey, if you want to compete for your age group world championship title, just know that these are the rules, and you could be drug tested at any point.
I think a lot of people agree. I've certainly posted on it in the past, and everyone felt the same. So it will be interesting to see if HYROX respond to you and what they do. If we can we just talk about training a little bit. Firstly, like you mentioned your injury, your foot injury. I think you were unable to run much for a long time. But clearly you can run now to a good standard. Do you feel like was that just work on the ergs, work on the bike that has transferred over to running?
So honestly, if I only did erg work, I would probably go crazy with the amount of volume I was trying to do because I can only be inside for so much time. Like I think my longest rowing and ski erg session is a session called Death by Ski Erg or Death by Assault Bike or Death by Rower. And those ones only take me about 45 minutes. And those are really my longest ski erg and rowing sessions. But you put me outside on a mountain bike or on a road bike, and like I did quite a few 5 to 7 hour rides.
Wow.
And a lot of 2 to 4 hour rides, like a ton of sub threshold work. I think it's interesting how you can see the trends in social media. Like everyone's like, "Oh, Zone 2 is incredible right now," and 5, 10 years ago, it's like, "Oh, HIIT training is incredible," and before that, it's like, "Oh, Zone 3 is incredible." Kind of like diets. It's like you have the Atkins diet from way back when, which is essentially the same thing as the keto diet, just recycled in a different name. And it's so funny to me because, like, right now, people are like, Zone 2, Zone 2, Zone 2. And I'm like, yes, Zone 2 is great. But also, like, sub threshold training, which is technically like the gray zone that people are trying to avoid. Sub threshold training is what I did a ton of because HYROX needs a ton of ability at that, like at threshold, and to produce less weight, like less waste, but also still continue to work on your threshold. Sub threshold training is incredible. So like I would do an hour to an hour and a half of sub threshold work on my bike on a lot of days when I couldn't run. And then the next day I would do maybe it depended on what part of the cycle I was in. But that's a lot of like zone 3 work. And then I also did all of my running was pretty much zone 5 and above because I couldn't run far and I couldn't really manage the pain for long. Um, and then I also do a lot of zone 2 and zone 1, depending on the time frame. So if I'm trying to build volume, I'll do it first through like zone 2 training. And that's another thing. Like a lot of people I see on social media or whatever, they'll be like walking on a treadmill and call it zone 2. And I'm like, if you're in zone 2 from walking, you got a different problem. Like zone 2 for me is between 136 and 157 beats per minute. Or it actually, I think it's 140 to 157. I'd have to have my zones pulled up. It depends if I'm running or biking, but that's like the general location of my zone 2. And for me to be there, man, like I've got to be running. For me to be at 140 beats per minute, I've got to be probably around 730 pace per mile or below. And it depends on fitness, of course. Like as your fitness goes up, the mile time drops. But so I do very little zone 2 running. And on the bike, I have to be at about a 250 watts to be in zone 2, 250 to 260. And so I actually I maybe do one zone 2 session a week because I do a lot of high end and then I do a lot of zone 1 and then I'll do sub threshold. And so zone 2, if I'm in about 3 weeks, I'll start doing a lot of zone 2 because my season will be over. But in my build phases and in my peak phases, I do very little zone 2, and it's a lot of threshold in zone 1 or VO2 max in zone 1 or sub threshold mixed with VO2 max and zone 1 recovery the next day. Because if I'm constantly asking my body to do a lot, eventually I'm just going to get sick and burn out.
So
So
the zone 1 work, are you thinking of as it's like a recovery
yeah,
run or
it's a
whatever?
recovery. Yeah, like an hour on the bike at like 200 watts. Like I'll literally put a limit for myself. I'll be like, I'm not gonna go above 250 watts on this ride. Like on all the climbs, on all the flats, everything. I'll have fun taking my bike off some jumps and hitting corners and all that. Like I'll have a good time, but on all the climbs, I'm going to keep it below 250 watts because this is a recovery session. And then same on the ski erg and on the rower. If I'm going for just to like get some time on the machine so my body's familiar, if it's a recovery session, I'm not going to pull faster than like 2 minutes per 500. Like that's starting to put me into zone two. And if it's a recovery session, I'm not trying to recover at zone two. If it's like an actual recovery day for me, which I think people have different terminology for recovery day. I almost never take a complete day off. My recovery day is an hour of easy movement on the bike, an hour easy run, or like 30 minutes easy run, 30-minute bike, an hour on the ski erg / rower. Like usually I'll mix them all together, but it's all easy, like super easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. And then you said about a lot of your runs are like zone 5. Is that as intervals, like less than 1,000 meters at a time type intervals,
Yeah.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah. I only do this is where it's tricky. Like I can only like I just made a social media post about how I kept running fitness without running very much. And people go off in the comments about how, oh, well, this doesn't work with this scenario and this scenario. And I'm like, no, no, no. I wasn't talking about everyone. I was talking about me. Like I'm training for 3Ks. I'm training for 5K, which is DecaFit. It's a 5K with stations mixed in, and an 8K, which is HYROX. So for me, in the longest run interval in all of those, like between obstacles, I'm maybe only running 200 meters to 400 meters in a Spartan race. And then in a DecaFit, I'm only running 5. And in a HYROX, I'm only running 1,000. So all of my intervals, because I'm working on my zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3 on non-impact, because I couldn't, like, it was just too painful. And also when it's painful, I ended up giving myself Achilles tendonitis on my right side because my left foot was so painful to run on. So I'd numb it with lidocaine spray and just go run because the doctor said it was okay. But it still hurt so bad that eventually my Achilles on my right side started getting upset because I was running lopsided. So that's why I ran so little. It wasn't because I couldn't run more, and I don't think running makes you better at running. Like running is the best thing to make yourself better at running. But if you can't handle the miles, basically what I like to do and what I think is the most effective way, depending on how far you are away from a race, is do all of your first 3 zones. Do those on like machines, do them on a bike, do it swimming. Swimming isn't as efficient as cross training as like a rower or a bike would be. Those are more similar to running. Biking's the most similar, because of the gait cycle is more similar. Like the pedal stroke is almost like running. But for zone 4, zone 5, and zone 6, like anytime I could and I could manage the pain, I would spend my running miles on those zones with like easy jogging between. So it might be, 6 by 1,000 or 5 by 1,000 with 70 seconds recovery. Or I do a lot of like 12 by 400s with 70 seconds recovery, or sometimes 60. And that's the thing, is like you can either choose to run the interval faster or you can bring the rest down. So as I get fitter, I might bring the rest from 70 seconds to 60, and then 50, and then 45. Usually I don't go below 45 seconds recovery. And then only one session, when I was starting to run again after I was able to start running, maybe 15 to 20 miles a week, I would spend 5 of those miles in a threshold session, where I would run around 5 minutes at threshold, and then I'd run 2 minutes at a float, and I'd do that 4 to 5 times. So
Okay. Interesting. And then on the strength side of things, when I sent you that survey, you had no idea really of like your 3-rep max squat, deadlift, and you're far from the only one that sort of had no idea. But do you feel like strength isn't that important in HYROX?
So there's there's different types of strength, just like there's different types of endurance. So you have aerobic endurance, anaerobic endurance, and you have strength endurance in like the scope of endurance. And I actually think HYROX is more of what I would call strength endurance.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a little bit different than raw strength, or it's very different than raw strength. So like if you put someone who can, maybe they can deadlift 600 pounds, you put them in a HYROX, by the time they get done running the 2000 meters and doing the ski erg, by the time they get to the sled, they're not only are they tired, so their max has dropped so far because their body is just flooded with all the waste products of having to do aerobic activity, or anaerobic activity for them, because they're not used to running. So they're just pooling all this lactic acid while their muscles are shutting down. And so by the time they get to a sled to push it, it's not actually anywhere near their 1 to 3 rep max. So that's where I think strength endurance is way more important. So I actually do a lot of training where I work on my raw strength. So I do like sometimes I'll do 4x3, or I'll do 4x4, or 4x8, depending on where I'm at in my cycle. But I focus more specifically on strength endurance, which is around the 20 to 100 rep max, or 20 to 100 rep range. So that's where lunges would fall in. That's where sled push and sled pull would fall in, because you're doing like every step on the sled is a small strength rep. And so you're doing probably over 100 reps throughout the 50 meters. So I actually train more of that, and then maybe 1 to 1.5 times a week, I'll do like a 4x4 squat and deadlift. But it's always, I don't even go for my max, because I always do it after 1 or 2 other quality sessions, because I'm already going to be sore. So I'm okay with doing a very heavy lift, because the next day is a recovery day anyways. Whereas if you do, you have your strength day and you have your aerobic, like long day, and then the next day you have your interval day. Well, that's basically 3 quality days stacked back to back to back. And I'm going to be super sore after all of those, or I'm going to be at least a little bit sore after all of those. So then I'm just getting 3 days of being sore plus the 4th or 5th day, when I could just stack uh, all 3 of those sessions in the same day, if you can handle it. Obviously, like right now I can handle that. So I'll do like my high end running, I'll fill in my cycling or like ski work, and then I'll do my strength session. And then the next day, like today for me is a deload day or a rest day. I only have a little bit of running and a little bit of machine work, and then tomorrow I'll go hard again, as long as my body feels good. So like I think stacking is a much more efficient way if you can do it.
Okay. Yeah, makes sense. All right, brilliant. One more question. Mindset. I like to ask people where their mind goes during a tough race, like HYROX or whatever you're doing, when things are getting really tough. Where does your mind go? What helps you?
Um, the lesser version of Rylan likes to maybe use some forbidden pre-workout type vibes. Like think about, all the hurt things, the difficult things that I've already done. But the better version of Rylan is grateful. And that's who's been showing up recently. Like I've really been trying to work on that. Because anger is a great motivator, but gratitude's probably better. I think gratitude is way better. So I try and race grateful. Like I had racing taken away from me. Like I literally took 12 races off the calendar this year, maybe 13. Um, and I wasn't planning on doing hybrid racing. I was planning on doing sky running and trail running instead. But I couldn't do any of that. So now I'm just grateful to be racing. So the whole time during Chicago, I was just praying and thanking God for giving me the health to be able to race. And also for allowing me to race one more race. Cause like I was definitely praying before that race. I could tell my body was shutting down a bit. I was like, just give me one more good one, just one more. And so, and I just told him, I was like, whatever you give me, I'll use. And so I was just thankful that he gave me a lot on that day. Cause ultimately, like, I think people get caught up in the, like Christians will post a verse that's like, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's a very common verse and it's a great verse, but what they don't realize is right before it says that, it talks about all of the hardships that Paul's going through. And he's basically like, whether I have everything or I have nothing, I can do all things. And so when people are, posting it on Instagram or like they're saying it and they're like, oh, like it's encouraging. Yeah. But what it also is meant to be like, even if it sucks, like even if I have a terrible race, I'm okay. And that's what that verse actually means. And so like I try and have that perspective of even though I might not have a good race, like I'm going to be grateful for it, if that makes sense.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you for this. It's been fantastic. What's your presuming like you continue in HYROX, what are your aims and what are your race plans for the rest of the season?
It's gonna be tricky. It's gonna be fun. So I have Decafit in 2.5 weeks, Decafit World Champs. Um, I'm ranked number one in all three. Like I have all three world records, but I know Kent is gonna be hard to beat. So that'll be a fun battle. So I'm focused on recovering and training for that. And then the weekend after that is Spartan World Champs in Abu Dhabi. And then I'll head to Nigeria to work with some orphanages down there with back-to-back missions. And then I'll head home and I'll have a small off season, but then I'm gonna start getting ready for the Tough Mudder Infinity race, the 8-hour race that's in Saudi Arabia. Um, and which I kind of have already been doing like a lot of endurance on the bike, so that'll transfer nicely. And that's in February, so I might do HYROX Vienna on the way over, but I'm not sure. And then other than that, I'll probably just wait till World Champs. So either you won't see me until World Champs, but that'll depend on HYROX's drug policy and how I'm feeling about that. Or you'll see me in Vienna and then World Champs. Those are probably the only two that I can make. Maybe DC. I don't know.
Okay. Busy man.
Yeah, yeah, it's hard to like juggle all the different race series, but that's why Chicago was really nice because it allowed me to punch the world champ slot without having to go to a bunch of other races. So that was the goal. That was the main goal.
Okay. Well, thank you for this. It's been brilliant. I could talk to you for hours, to be honest. Where should people go if they want to follow you, find out more about you?
I'm the most active on Instagram, so it's just at Rylan Schadegg. I also have a YouTube channel that I'm gonna start doing some like day in the life videos. I actually just hired someone to help me with that. So it'll be a lot of like how I train, how I eat, lifestyle stuff, just to give people an idea if they want to do HYROX or if they want to do Spartan racing or a mix of everything, kind of like I do, like just what it looks like. So yeah, those are probably the best two places to find me.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Brilliant. Thank you. Good luck for everything that you're doing, and I will hopefully catch you again soon.
Yeah, hopefully, man. Thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Cheers.